coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. If Gilmore Girls is known for anything, it's fast talking, excessive coffee consumption, and the unbelievable gastronomic choices of Lorelai and Rory. This week, we're continuing the discussion from our special episode last week with Larissa from Eating Gilmore and discussing the role of food on the show. Make sure to go back and check that one out if you haven't seen it already. It's so much more complicated than these girls really eat a lot. There are implications of fatphobia, emotional eating, even disordered eating, and pretty privilege displayed across the run of the show, sometimes overtly, like in the revival, but other times more subtly and insidiously. And the characters each have distinct and notable relationships to food and eating. So we have a lot more to dive into this week, so let's get to it.
But before we do that, this is your regular reminder that this is a spoilers all podcast, so proceed at your own peril. And if you could like, subscribe, comment, and share this video to your Gilmore fan friends, we would be ever so grateful. And the algorithm gods will be fed, pun intended. I would also like to issue a disclaimer that neither of us is a health or nutrition provider or eating disorder clinician. So none of what we say today is in any way definitive diagnostic or health information or advice. Everyone's health needs and dietary journeys are unique, and we're just here to have a conversation about the cultural and social implications and portrayals on the show, more so than trying to provide any nutritional information. And I would also like to issue some what I think are fairly obvious trigger warnings for discussion of dieting and diet culture, eating disorders, fat phobia, body image. So if that isn't supportive to your journey, feel free to click away. With that out of the way, it's time for our episode synopses. So our first one this week is season 3, episode 9, a deep fried Korean Thanksgiving. In our first proper Gilmore Girls Thanksgiving episode, Lorelai and Rory overcommit to the events they plan to attend after Emily insists they also come to the Gilmore house on top of their usual Stars Hollow plans. They start the day at the Kims, where the tofurkey isn't exactly appealing. Next up is a quick stop at Suki's, where Jackson and the Belleville clan are deep frying the turkey, much to Suki's dismay. Then they go to Luke's, where Rory's tepid kiss with Jess, in an attempt not to ruffle the town's feathers after her split from Dean, catches Lorelai and Babette's notice. Finally, at the Gilmore dinner, the talk of the table turns to college admissions, and Rory reveals to Lorelai that she not only applied to Harvard, but also Princeton and Yale. And Lorelai isn't happy, and a fight breaks out. Back in Stars Hollow, Rory runs into Jess on the street and gives him a much more hard kiss, which Dean sees, and he tries to antagonize Jess. Lorelai checks on Suki, who is now several margaritas deep, which brings on one of my favorite lines of the whole show. I've already gone through the 5 stages of grieving. Denial, anger. I don't remember these 2, but they were served on the rocks with salt. Now I'm just happily enscotched in acceptance. Enscotched?
Ensconced? No. I think she had it right the first time.
I would probably prefer to be enscotched, frankly.
Enscotched. Yep.
It was late. There was scotch.
Yeah. This is followed up by episode 10 of season 3, That'll Do Pig. When Rory runs into Dean on the street, things are a little awkward at first, but they decide to get some pie at Weston's and maintain some semblance of a friendship. Dean tells Rory that he has applied to Southern Connecticut State and that he couldn't have done it without her. But when Rory and Jess run into Dean and Clara at the Winter Carnival, Jess isn't thrilled that Rory didn't tell him about their renewed interactions. It's also Richard's 60th birthday, and Lorelai struggles to pick out a gift for him, so Rory helps her out. Trix surprises everyone by showing up for his birthday dinner, which sends Emily into a frenzy because she wasn't able to get all of her gifts out of storage. Trix wants to see Lorelai's house, so Emily shows up and tries to make it more presentable. Trix also drops the bomb that she has decided that she is done with London and is moving back to Hartford now that Corn has moved out of her house. Lorelai lets Lane and the band practice in her garage, but almost lets slip how Lane and Dave are into each other to Zach and Brian. Paris is also blissful in her new relationship with Jamie, and she confides in Rory about their Christmas spent together with his family.
Corn.
That's Trix.
It's one of the funniest, like, random little subplots ever. But that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about diet culture. So, obviously the show ran from 2000 to 2007 originally. And this was just one of those, like, peak moments in our history as human beings where we just had really messed up ideas about diet and food. Throughout the 90s, we had the super skinny, emaciated look. Kate Moss famously saying nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, and all the heroin chic models just, I can't even. So that even people who were fairly like normal size were viewed as overweight. Like, can we just like give a shout out to Bridget Jones's Diary for a sec, saying that like 140 pounds is somehow like, this is me at my heaviest and I'm living my best life. Like, excuse me? Just sit with that for a minute. 140 pounds is somehow...
I don't want to.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't want to sit here with that either. It's just horrifying. And, I think back to some of the things I like to revisit regularly from that time period, like Sex and the City and Love Actually and The Holiday, and just sort of like remembering the types of bodies that were promoted and people kind of sitting around talking about each other's bodies, and it's the way that eating and drinking and exercise are portrayed on these things. And for a lot of us who grew up with this show and who are millennials and maybe a little bit older, like, we grew up with this stuff. It has imprinted on our psyche in a way that, like, it's very hard to deprogram from. It's kind of crazy how insidious some of this stuff was. And so I think that's why it's so interesting to talk about this stuff as it relates to Gilmore, because Gilmore really tried to flip the script by having girls who actually ate food, including junk food. I use like the bunny ear quotation marks because calling food junk is like, there can be some problematic stuff with that. But eating foods that you would typically count as a treat or something you should really only have in moderation, they were eating this stuff regularly. They never really talked about or commented on each other's weights, except in very specific instances. There were some fuller figured people on the show who were not a size 0, and their weight was never a moment, like, it was never given a moment of thought or criticism or anything. But then on the flip side of that, there were people outside of the main cast who were fair game for that kind of discussion or ridicule, like the ballerina from Die Jerk. So I think Gilmore was trying to say something about the diet culture of the time and maybe didn't quite hit the mark. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, is there anything that kind of jumps out at you from the show where they just really like did some of the characters dirty?
I mean, quite a few. You make an excellent example with the ballerina, and that just leads me to thinking like of just all the pressures that are put upon professional dancers. But I think people like men, women, whomever, that are within like just doing ballet, like, it's not specifically even focused on women. Like, it's the men too, where it's like, you need to be fit, you need to be thin, you need to be in shape because you need to fit into the costuming, but also it's such a demanding physical rigor in terms of what ballet requires that if you're not fit, you probably physically won't be able to keep up with the steps and the demands of it, but you also probably will not be hired for jobs because they want those people that are twigs, that are stick thin, that just look good on stage. So it's tragic, but it's in line with what we saw with the ballerina in Gilmore Girls, of just her feeling this constant need and this pressure to maintain that figure because she was not going to work otherwise. I think that's also something that is put on professional sports figures and athletes, not in the same way as dancers, but we see it with them too, where it's like, you need to be physically fit. And again, I get it because you're a pro athlete. Most of those fields, like, regardless of what sport you're participating in, do require that physical strength and that, durability, so to say, except for golf, in which case go be an 800-pound whale and you'll still do the exact same thing regardless.
That's an insult to whales, but okay.
It is. You're right. I'm sorry. My apologies to the whales.
We know you don't like to golf. It's fine.
But I see the need for the physical fitness, but again, like, when you place that innate pressure on people to maintain that credo and that physicality, it can be really harmful to their psyche and their mindset. And I don't want to like go off on the rails too much, but I mean, look at Black Swan. That's, I think, a perfect example of it. And Natalie Portman in that movie, like, just lost it by the end because she faced so much pressure to maintain that physicality and what the demands of that profession and that job entailed for her, that she just broke down at the end. And again, we've issued our trigger warnings. It cost her life because she just
spoily.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie yet. It's fine. I knew that she sort of snapped, but I didn't know that part. But I'm sure that actually figuring out how it happens will still hit.
Yeah. But yeah, like, it's just, it can go that far. And that's not the only movie or the instance, real life or fictional or otherwise, that it happens. And it's devastating and it's not okay, whether it's happening in real life or in a fictional world.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, because Amy herself was a dancer. Her mother, Maven Hughes, is a dancer. And so she was a ballerina, I believe, if memory serves, when she was younger. And that's part of the reason that Bunheads came about. Have you seen any of Bunheads?
One or two.
I watched the pilot when Dan was here last, and it was like a damn fever dream. Like, it was a little wild. It's funny, 'cause I think some people hold a soft spot for it and thought it was sort of done dirty. But if the pilot is any indication, it has some like major flaws in its premise. In terms of, again, I don't want to like give any spoilers for that because this isn't a Bunheads podcast, and so there's no like spoiler warning for that encompassed here. But Hubble, like the whole setup of how she even kind of comes to this small town, and with Hubble and what happens there, it's just like, this is so weird and messed up and problematic. So I might give it a few more episodes and see what happens, but the first episode was not good. I've heard it maybe it gets better, but I'm not surprised it only got one season if the pilot's anything to go by. But yeah, so I think I read somewhere in some sort of interview that Amy said something along the lines of, the fastest way to lose a dancer's body is to sit down and write all the time. And so I find it interesting that someone who was part of a culture that was so judgmental towards the female body, female form, so critical of their physicality and the way that they dance, was such a jerk to people who didn't look like that, because you're just perpetuating the crap that, you know, maybe people were putting you through or putting your cohort through as you were going through that. Like, I don't know if she was trying to fight against it and just didn't do a good job, or if it was just so ingrained in her that she didn't see what she was doing. Do you have any takes on that? Like, do you think that she was trying to push against that culture and just missed the mark?
I mean, obviously we'd have to ask her, and I hope that if there's ever a day that comes that we have that opportunity that we can do so. I love Amy, and I love everything she did for this show, but my initial gut reaction is that she missed the mark. And it wouldn't be the first time within the show that she's done so. I mean, we've talked about how feministic I think she thought she was trying to make this show. And it didn't turn out that way as much as I think she thought that it did. I think this parallels that. I think she was trying to write something and perpetuate this idea and this notion with plot progression and not even just individual like episode specific writing. I think it was an overall theme and an overall idea that she was trying to contribute to as the show progressed. But I don't think she succeeded in the way that she perhaps thought that she did or that she wanted to. And it's okay because, you know, it's not the only show that has tried to put forth an idea and doesn't succeed with what they're trying to like just communicate to the viewer. But in this regard, when you're trying to communicate something along these lines that does affect so many people in their daily lives and can be triggering and a constant daily struggle for so many, if you're not communicating that effectively, and you're not doing your homework, so to say, to figure out what real struggles people actually have before you put content like that on screen, it can be really troubling to anyone who's watching because they can feel misrepresented, underrepresented, and it can have really devastating effects when they feel like I'm perhaps almost even being made fun of or shamed by a show that I love and that perhaps wasn't trying to do it, but that's the result now.
Mm-hmm. It's a comfort show to so many of us. And so to have those moments where it feels like, ooh, like they're making fun of someone who looks like me, that can sting. I just double checked, and Die Jerk was written by Daniel Palladino, which frankly tracks, given what he wrote in Summer in A Year in the Life. So now it's starting to make a lot more sense to me. But again, every script went through Amy's hands, and she had the option to veto the fatphobic crap, and she didn't. I know it was more like socially acceptable at the time to lampoon fat people for some reason because we're jerks as a society. But like, if that's something you've been through or you've seen how it affects other people, why would you ever let that make it to the screen? I just don't get it. I don't like it. And the fact that you didn't learn anything between 2007 and 2016 about what that does to people psychologically, and you still let it get into your reboot of the show, I feel like there's no excuse for that. We can't excuse their behavior. I think it goes beyond any particular messaging or whatever to just like not make fun of people. I don't get it. Yeah, right.
Like,
it's just
wait,
it's a simple concept.
We're gonna what? We're gonna be nice all the time?
You can be sassy and funny without using other people as the butt of your joke or like their size or something that they can't control as a punchline.
Yeah, and it again, like I just want to focus on there. Like sometimes you can't control it. You know, there are people, and again, we're not here to offend anybody, but there are people who are overweight and it's by their own making and it's by their own doing because they are actively choosing to consume unhealthy foods, maintain a poor diet, not exercise. And so when you're doing all of those things and the end result is that you are overweight or obese, it falls in line with the decisions that you are actively making. But there are instances of people who are overweight and even underweight, not by choice, but from biology, because perhaps they have some sort of genetic defect or ongoing, just again, genetic underlying issue that was, they've had from birth that allows them to not gain weight in the way that they should be, not put on bone mass or muscle or any sort of structure in that way. So they need to supplement that. But even with those supplements, sometimes they're just always underweight. Some people are overweight for perhaps similar reasons because it's just a genetic defect and it's biology that is not having to do with any of their own personal decisions, but it's just something that's beyond their control that is allowing their weight to fluctuate in the way that it is on either end of the spectrum. So to look at a person and to judge them for their weight when they could have any one of those things going on, you don't know what that person's medical background is. You don't know what they have going on in their life. So how dare you judge them for that? Nor should we judge anybody, I mean, for weight regardless, any of the time. But we're not even considering those underlying issues that people could have coming into play before we look at someone and say, ew, you're fat, or ooh, like, you're underweight, you need to eat more. Like, what's wrong with you? Are you, do you have like an eating disorder? Like, we just are so quick to jump the gun and make an assumption, and we don't consider what that person might have going on.
That's exactly right. We're so likely to make a judgment based on a visual. And it's funny how we can go from like what we like demonize in skinny people, we prescribe to fat people, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's like the perceptions and the recommendations are different depending on which end of the spectrum you're on with your weight. And it's very like counterintuitive and unhelpful. And it's really not based in anything that's backed by evidence or, your own personal like medical stuff that's going on. So it's really unfortunate that we do that. And going back to that ballerina, she wasn't even that big. Like, she's like a pretty average person. And I think what they did was they tried to put her in really like chunky clothes to hide that she was just a normal sized person. They tried to make her look bigger than she actually was. And if you think about it, being a ballerina, even at the level of like, was it like the Miami Ballet or something that she was with for a while? And she's dancing at Yale. Like, even to get to that level and to dance for that long, to train that much, you have to be in good shape. You have to, maintain a diet that allows you to have the energy to keep up with such a rigorous schedule. And so she probably is engaging in health promoting behavior, but her body doesn't look like we should think it looks like based on how much exercise she gets and what she eats. And so we're like, well, there must be something wrong and you must just be fat. And then they try to make a joke about it being the costumer's fault that she can't fit into a typical leotard. And I'm like, oh, it's so gross. And then Richard and Emily validate it as well. Lorelai sort of like, man, you write mean. Like, it's one thing to talk this way and it's another to see it in print. And then Richard and Emily are like, oh, you eviscerated that girl. Like, just applauding her for being a jerk, like literally die jerk. That she's a jerk. We shouldn't be letting Rory off the hook for this, but Doyle condones it. Her mom is sitting there joking with them. And Richard and Emily are like, this was great. You're an excellent writer. Oh, it's nasty and unnecessary. But moving on a little bit, something you said also just made me want to move on to Rory and Lorelai and their eating habits, because you said, some people are sort of tipped into the overweight category by their own diet choices and a sedentary lifestyle. So let's talk about our Gilmore Girls, because they're sort of the opposite of that. They tend to eat quite a bit of processed food and, diner food that tends to be fried or cooked in oil, as opposed to eating a lot of fruits and veggies at home or cooking for themselves a lot with like control over the ingredients, having healthy snacks like, nuts and seeds instead of red vines. So what do you think the writers were trying to do by making Rory and Lorelai so like, by just having them eat so much what we would call junk?
I don't actively know what they were trying to do, but I can say that whatever their goal may have been, I think it was just, you went in the opposite direction, where anyone who is watching that show, who is seeing the way that these women eat, and seemingly never put on an ounce of weight. There are people out in the world like that who can just consume whatever they want to and will never gain weight and not have their weight fluctuate. But for the vast majority of anyone existing in the world, that is never going to be the result. If you ate like the Gilmore women ate, you'd be fast tracking yourself to being more obese, if not morbidly obese, to signing yourself up for heart conditions, for
Diabetes.
Let's call Wilford Brimley so you can get your meds tomorrow.
But everyone else is on Ozempic, so like, where's all the diabetes medication?
It's probably where all of the anvils went, to be honest.
Yeah. Hashtag semaglutide.
Yeah. But you're just, again, fast tracking yourself towards that high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart issues, lung issues, kidney and liver function issues. Your body will suffer if you maintain a diet like the one that the Gilmore women had, where having a shred of lettuce on your burger is your vegetable, fulfillment for the week. Like, it did its job. You can't eat in the way that they did and expect to have the same results. And whether or not the writers or the creators of the show were trying to perpetuate any sort of idea that is realistic, or whether they even knew that it was unrealistic, but they went forth with it anyway. It's like, you're not telling your audience anything good or substantial or of value here. If anything, you're feeding them misinformation and false information in terms of what a diet can look like and what you can be ingesting and consuming without any sort of repercussion. And unless you've had education to tell you otherwise, stemming from school, like, health education in schools, or your own personal education, or just reading and trying to maintain a lifestyle for that on your own. For anyone who may be watching who's just ignorant and doesn't know any better and sees that, you're handing them a silver platter, again, pun intended, there's going to be so many food puns. You're just handing them this silver platter of just so many health issues down the line that they may have to personally combat because they were led to seeing this show and believing that their results would be the same as these women. And it's not that I ever needed to see it because it's not what the show is about, but like, if there had ever been an episode where, like, Lorelai goes to the doctor and her doctor's like, your blood pressure is like skyrocketing, so you need to lay off of XYZ and have more fruits and veggies. It's like, that's truthful and that's realistic. And again, it's not something that we were ever going to see, but there was no insertion of that in there. It was always just, these women can eat whatever they want to. No one ever really passes judgment. And it's just a lifestyle that they choose for themselves without seeing what the other side of that truthful coin is and looks like for your average person.
Yeah, all true. I like your point about education in terms of, I don't think maybe we're doing a good enough job educating people about nutrition and exercise and exactly what it takes to live a healthy lifestyle. I think there's so much misinformation out there, and there's so much value in the diet industry that a lot of the good information is drowned out by MLM pitches and influencers telling you that, like, you need to be buying their product or their supplement so that you can lose weight and look good and feel good like them, even though these are unregulated products that have absolutely no backing to them. Like, if someone tries to get you to like join their Beachbody program, run. Because Autumn Calabrese has no nutritional background. Do not let her create your diet program. Like, what? Mm-hmm. There's so much bad crap out there, bad information, people who are trying to give you health or medical advice who have no education on the topic, but they think that their influencer status or whatever information their MLM provided to them qualifies them to talk about this stuff on the internet. And it really doesn't. So, like, again, run, try to find better sources of information, like people who are actually registered dietitians or like the Mayo Clinic, stuff like that is actually better information that is at least somewhat validated by some kind of science. Even if diet science and like nutritional science isn't perfect, we still need to be taught how to like make these determinations for ourselves. And, you know, obviously the show, it's not obligated to teach us anything about nutrition, and it's not obligated to cover any topics like a teenager dealing with an eating disorder, right? There are plenty of other shows from this time period that were dealing with just that, and a lot of them didn't do a very good job. But I don't know if going so far in the other direction was helpful or not, because it just sort of perpetuated a different kind of messed up idea or ideal about what femininity should look like. It was more of that sort of like, not like other girls, manic pixie dream metabolism. Like, this isn't real. Well, it is, but it's like very uncommon for people to have metabolisms that fast. And it makes me wonder, like, exactly how they kept the weight off. I'm like, is it non-exercise non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or the thermic effect of food? Is the caffeine raising their resting metabolic rate? Is that how this is working?
But that's also super unhealthy. If that was the answer, we don't know. That's also largely unhealthy. But go on.
Yeah, the science isn't very settled on whether or not caffeine can reliably increase your metabolic rate at rest. You know, it can vary depending on whether you're assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, how much you drink. If you've been drinking for a long time, the effects might actually wear off over time. So there's a chance that it could be a contributing factor because they drink so much coffee. But there are diminishing returns the more you drink and the longer you drink caffeine. So that could maybe not be a thing. Thermic effect of food, for those who aren't nerds like me, is basically the amount of calories or energy it takes to digest. And so if you're eating a lot, you burn more calories because you have to digest it all. It's like this weird kind of cyclical thing. And then non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Why am I struggling with that so much today? Is basically the calories you burn going about your daily business. Anything you do that's not like devoted exercise, walking to work, running errands, cleaning, anything like that is that kind of thing. And I'm like, well, they live in a very walkable community and we always see them walking and talking. Maybe talking is one of their activities that helps them burn so many calories. But so there are these, yeah, these are my theories about maybe how some of what they eat is getting burned off. But yeah, you're right about the education portion of it. And I guess that kind of leads me to Lorelai. I alluded to this last week when we were talking to Larissa, but she grew up in an environment where all of her food was prepared for her. She was never taught to cook. She was a young mother who lived in a shed that didn't have a kitchen. So she like wasn't even really able to try really learning how to cook in her 20s. So she was kind of always reliant upon these convenience foods. And it's such an interesting thing to consider how that was passed on to Rory and the kind of example that was set for her. Because we see a lot of Rory's diet as a teenager is made up of comfort food, pizza, mac and cheese, Chinese food, candy and chocolate. It's not the best. It's passing on disordered eating habits to the next generation. And I'm wondering, we talked about mom shaming a couple of weeks ago. Do you think it's mom shaming to judge Lorelai for letting Rory eat like that, or teaching her that that's an appropriate way to nourish herself?
It's a great question. I'm gonna still say yes, it is. Because shaming at its core is defined by passing judgment. So whether that judgment is correct or not, the end result is still the same and the definition still remains the same. I could shame, let's say Rory was 1,000 pounds. I could shame her for being 1,000 pounds, and whether or not, like, you know, whether it's positive or negative, the result again is still the same. I'm passing a judgment. Whether or not I'm doing it because I'm coming from a place of care and concern, or whether I'm just trying to like mock and poke fun, at its core, again, the definition still remains the same. So, which is why I have to say, yes, you're still shaming. If you're looking at Lorelai and what she allows Rory to eat and consume, and we have to think that it was probably during Rory's childhood, not too far off from what we see her diet like as a teenager when we meet her. It's concerning that a parent would let their child maintain that diet, because you're again potentially signing your child up for so many health defects and problems that can arise even during their childhood, if not from a later stage in life down the line. So you would be, I think, hopefully coming from a place of care and concern where you're just like, maybe you should alter what you let your daughter eat, not because I'm trying to tell you what to do or be innately mean, but just because I care about your specific child's well-being. So maybe try to insert some of these things into their diet to allow them to be healthier. Yeah. Good thing to do, but again, you're still shaming and passing a judgment. So there's a really gray area there, where you could be doing it from a good place or from a bad place, but you're still shaming and passing a judgment regardless. And so there's a fine line, and just again, there's a lot of gray area there where you have to be really careful with how you're communicating those things, even when you are trying to come from a good place.
Yeah. In a way, I agree. Definitionally, I think sort of inserting yourself into the decisions made by another mother is sort of inherently intrusive. But at the same time, I think there's a difference between having an attitude of like, that's not the way I would do it, versus all the evidence, all the science points to the fact that what you're eating and what your daughter eating is actively harmful. And there's a line that that might be being crossed here where intervention might actually be necessary. And like, you might have to do a little quote unquote mom shaming. Like, I think we should give grace to busy moms who are doing their best. Lorelai had to bust her butt as a young mother to provide for them, and she didn't have the skills or the time or the means to cook nutritious meals for Rory all the time. But the extremes at the ends of the diet spectrum, you have the sort of like, I'm putting you on a strict vegan diet because that's what I believe is the best diet for everyone, versus have at it, eat whatever you want. Like, eat half a pizza, eat a whole pizza, I don't care. And then follow it up with some red vines for dessert. Like, these two sort of attitudes and philosophies about like what's okay to eat are like, neither of them is necessarily particularly useful, especially when it comes to kids and the impacts that those beliefs or impositions on their dieting habits can have on them in later life. But because there is a right way for Lorelai to let Rory kind of have what she wants. Like, you can eat candy and chocolate and all of that in moderation. Like, there's absolutely no reason why she couldn't be like, it's our once a month movie night, let's grab some candy. But it seems to be regularly, possibly multiple times a week, that they're doing this. And I think, therefore, that Lorelai is towing perhaps too closely to the unhealthy end of the spectrum, where their primary diet is composed mostly of sugary foods and red meat and beige foods like pasta or like white bread, or pancakes, stuff like that, where it's like stuff that's less nutritionally dense than a more well-rounded diet would be. So I think, like, again, I don't want to put unnecessary pressure or harm or anything onto them. But like you said, eating like this for prolonged periods, which they've clearly been doing, could be like could lead to some really negative health outcomes down the road. Just because they look healthy now doesn't mean that they will always be healthy. Like, just because you're skinny doesn't mean you're healthy. You can be genetically small and have a fast metabolism, but that doesn't mean you're the picture of health. And you can also be overweight, but and currently metabolically healthy. But we also know that being overweight or obese is a known contributor to disease in the long run. And so both things are true, right? Where you can look unhealthy but be healthy now, or you can look healthy and be unhealthy now. So I think obviously we're getting the latter with Rory and Lorelai. But just because they're skinny doesn't mean that they're healthy. And it's very concerning just how much she lets Rory eat it. Again, it's one thing to have a little bit here and there. Like, I do it all the time. I'm not like some paragon of clean eating. You don't have to be. But when you go that far in the opposite direction, it gets into some really dodgy territory where that could be considered like very harmful. I don't even know exactly how to describe it, but like it ain't good. So, and the other thing about it too is how the show is lying to us. It is just straight up lying to us because Rory and Lorelai are eating all this stuff. I mean, obviously, for production reasons, they can't actually eat all of this because they would be so sick by the end of filming from all the takes that it's just not possible to actually eat as much as they eat. But behind the scenes, Lauren Graham was maintaining a strict diet regimen and strict exercise regimen. She's clearly a very like athletic body type. Alexis Bledel was younger, so she probably did have that sort of like naturally slimmer frame just because she hadn't really hit that point of aging yet where it started to kind of catch up to her like it catches up to the rest of us. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on sort of like the fact that on the show it's portrayed one way, but behind the scenes there's a very different story being told in real life?
Yeah, I mean, and Gilmore Girls is certainly not the only show to do it. I even jumped to like, I mean, the first thought I have is like, you know, Friends as a show, because there was always just a lot of coffee consumption and just eating in that show too. But regardless, it happens on pretty much every single TV show or movie where food is brought into the scene or brought into a picture. Or a frame. You're going to be doing numerous takes of whatever that scene or that shot is. I mean, sometimes you can get it in one, but more often than not, you need to do it over and over and over. So if you're consuming, if there's like a cookie and it's like, oh, in this scene, this character eats a cookie. Okay, so you do a take, you don't get it perfect. Now you need to eat another cookie and another cookie and another cookie. You're going to get sick. It's not healthy. So a lot of the times the food that is put into the shot is just fake, or it's not even real, or it's only being consumed once or not at all, and then they have to like go back and figure out how do we modify this scene. But what you're seeing as the final result of that shot or of that take is not always truthful. So again, it just goes back to the falsehood of how we see our Gilmore Girls and these women eating, because you know, they probably had to, like, if there's a scene where they're having, you know, desserts and Westons and they're trying cakes, you know, they might have had to do that 20 times. It doesn't mean that Lauren Graham and Alexis Bledel are eating 40 pieces of cake that day. It just means that either the cake is not real or just that they're having one bite here and there. It's just, again, none of it is truthful. So what you're feeding your audience is just this misinformation of, they can try cakes and go to Luke's for hamburgers and fries and pie all the time, and then come home and order in Chinese food from Al's and constantly live out of their refrigerator every single night, just reheating leftovers and subsist and exist in that way where there's no, again, health repercussions, it doesn't work that way. So even from a filming perspective and a behind the scenes perspective, you're again just you're lying to your audience. And it's it's a fictional world, and these shows and these movies are for profit, so I get it. But at the end of the day, I wish there was a better realization from a creator standpoint of just, what are we telling our audience when we continue to dish this out to them? Pun intended again.
Yeah. And again, just thinking about the way that we treat actresses in Hollywood, and actors for that matter, just anyone who is on television, just the external pressure from the real world to maintain a slim figure, how much effort and money and time goes into looking good on screen and making sure you don't have like an extra ounce of body fat, because you will be viciously mocked. You will get, 2d4 psychic damage or more from, D&D puns.
Yeah. I'll also just jump in here and say, like, it's not even a cliche. Like when they say like the camera adds 20 pounds, like, I mean, just from a shot perspective, like, yeah, like when you're looking at somebody through a lens, like there can be a distortion with how you're seeing them. But that's also just a really horrible cliche and generalization where it's like, oh, the camera's going to make you look fatter, so make sure that you're slimmer so that when you appear on camera, you don't have to worry about that extra 20 pounds that the camera's going to place on you. Do you understand how much you're hurting not even just an actress or a woman, but men too, when you tell them, be thin, because the camera's going to make you look fatter, because they need you to be thin for this role? So much damage. Go back to what you were saying.
Yeah, that exactly is kind of part of the discussion I wanted to have. It was like how, especially at the time, body transformation was a big thing. Like, look at Charlize Theron with Monster, and how she put on all that weight and had that major transformation in order to play Aileen Wuornos. And she got the Oscar for it. And then Renee Zellweger put on weight, quote unquote, to play Bridget Jones. But then a couple months later, she was like flapper thin in Chicago. So these fluctuations in a short period of time are not only not attainable by most people, but they're probably really bad for your body to either like gain too much weight for a role or to lose too much weight for a role, and to yo-yo between the two like every couple of years. I'm looking at you, Christian Bale.
Like, get out of my head.
Right? Okay. It cannot be good for your body. And not only that, but it's just so like gross that as a society we applaud these brave women who put on a couple pounds for a role, but then shame anyone who looks like that in real life. Like, we wouldn't give that role to an actress who already looks like that, because there wouldn't be an actress like that in Hollywood, because we're shallow.
Mm-hmm. You're not wrong. And I'm just gonna really quick pinball for the Christian Bale thing, because you're right. Like, he is a perfect example of an actor who has been asked to fluctuate his weight from one end of the spectrum to another. And I think like Matt McConaughey too, just the amount of weight that man was required to lose, in this case, not gain, but lose, to do Dallas Buyers Club. He looked like a twig and like a stick. And it's like, it's because he's trying to embody the physicality of someone who is going through the health struggles of what he was going through in Dallas Buyers Club. I won't get into it. Just go watch the movie.
Don't spoil another movie for me.
Yeah, just go watch it if you care to. But he was required to drop an unhealthy amount of weight for that film. And when you see Matt McConaughey in that movie, you're just like, he looks sick. And just like, that's the best way I can put it. He's so thin that he looks sick. And it's like, please get help and actually put on weight, because what have you done? Like, or what are you doing? And again, he was representing a certain subset. I don't want to spoil a certain subset of people going through a certain something. So people going through that are going to be thin in the way that he was, but you're demanding that of an actor and of your average person to take on that health risk for the sake of their profession. And that's also not okay. Like, any day of the week, whether you're asking them to gain 50 pounds or lose 50 pounds, why not instead, and I don't want to go off too much into the weeds with this, why not instead just hire an actor or an actress who actually already fits that body type without demanding someone alter their physique so much in that way? But it goes back to what you said too, because in Hollywood and in real life, someone who had that natural physique, whether it was being that largely underweight or that largely overweight, would not get hired in Hollywood to begin with. And it's just catastrophic.
Yeah, there's such a double standard where it's like we applaud Rory and Lorelai for eating junk food, but we also see them being skinny. It's a tacit acceptance of what Hollywood was doing there, where it's like, well, we're making them eat all this stuff because they're quirky. They're just such quirky people, and they just happen to eat quirky foods like licorice and pizza, and it became such a huge like personality point for them. But in real life, they were probably being torn apart in the media for, not being a size 0. And yeah, I hate the double standard. I think we gotta rid ourselves of it. I think we're getting closer, but we're not quite there yet. We still have some very backwards ideas about what health looks like, and there's still a lot of misunderstanding of fat people in the medical establishment and all of that kind of stuff. And so that obviously hasn't made it to the mainstream either, because if the doctors aren't even totally in the loop, how's the average person supposed to fare with all of that? So let's move along, because I feel like we've been kind of on Lorelai and Roy for a long time. Let's talk about someone who tries to keep Lorelai and Roy healthier. Luke. Luke is someone who views food a little more as like something that you need, as nourishment, as vitality, as, hey, make sure you're actually getting what you need. So do you have any particular thoughts about Luke and his relationship to food?
I mean, I feel like I understand what you're saying, that he tries to keep Lorelai and Rory healthy, and I believe that he does. I mean, there are instances of them coming into the diner and him just being like, "You really gonna eat that? Or you gonna let Rory eat that?" Or like, they'll order like, extra pie or extra fries, or just load up on junk food, and he's like, "You're gonna put that in your system?" But he's also like, he's passing judgment there too. And again, it goes back to like coming from a place of concern and maybe just being like, well, why don't you just, maybe in Luke's mind, like, oh gosh, I wish this woman would just order a salad once a week, please. So he's trying, but he's also going to have, I think, a bias as well, just because of what his profession is. His career is food and serving food to other people. So I'm sure he has regular customers in the diner who maybe are always ordering salads or wraps or healthier options. And then he has Lorelai and Rory rolling up every single day of the week, just being like, double cheeseburger, fries, chocolate milkshake, keep it coming, But who is he to pass judgment when that's your job and that's your livelihood? It's not for you to comment on what your customers are consuming. It's just your job to serve them. So again, this is a fictional world, and in this case, Lorelai has been his friend for X amount of years at this point. Rory is almost like, his daughter. So it's like, yeah, you're having a care and concern, but also at the same time, I have to counter it with, well, who are you to say, or who are you to dictate what they eat? They're paying customers. Just give them what they want.
Yeah. On that note, I pulled a quote. I can't remember which episode this is from, but there's a moment when Luke is going off. He's like, how can people eat this much? And Lorelai is going back and forth with him, being like, this isn't all for one person, Luke. It's disgusting. It's making me sick to my stomach. Well, then have you ever thought maybe you're in the wrong industry? I should get rid of the plates, make them all strap on a feed bag, hang bells around their necks, enter them in county fairs. Like, one, ew. Like, comparing people to cows. Very nice thing to do. And two, it does sort of drive home that point where it's like, yeah, like, you're the one who chooses to serve this kind of food. Like, you're the one who serves cheeseburgers and Monte Cristos and chili fries. And then you're judging your customers for eating it. And it made me wonder, because I'm like, why does Luke serve that kind of food if it's not what he likes to eat? Like, we've seen he has a much stronger skill set with cooking than just fairly basic diner food, sandwiches and burgers and all that kind of stuff. He's got some skills in the kitchen. So why didn't he open some other kind of restaurant? Was it just because that was what was kind of like a hole in the Stars Hollow culinary field? Like, is that just kind of...
sorry.
Is that the culture? Or I had another thought that hadn't really occurred to me before when I was thinking about this, but we know Luke's father passed away. And he got sick, but we don't know what he got sick with. And I'm wondering if perhaps his father died because of some sort of weight-related illness. Like, maybe he had a heart attack and just slowly degenerated after that. Or maybe he had diabetes or something else that contributed to his, like, early demise, shall we say. And maybe this kind of food is maybe what Luke would gravitate towards normally in terms of, like, these staple comfort foods, but he won't allow himself to eat them very often because he doesn't want to end up like his dad.
That is a fantastic thought. And it is something that I admittedly never really considered until now, but that is an excellent theory. And you're right, we don't know why his father passed. We just know that he did. Maybe it was something like that, and that would line up perfectly for me in my mind of just, how it would affect how he himself chooses to eat, but also why, if he sees Lorelai and Rory, two people that he does care about significantly in his life, consuming food in that same way, that he could be concerned, because it's just a direct reminder of what his father went through, and not wanting that for them either, and knowing how dangerous of a path that can be when you're ingesting those calories and making those diet choices. That's a really, really excellent point. But to also answer your question, why, if he's concerned about that, is he continuing to serve that food and not perhaps open a restaurant or an establishment that serves up something different? My basic and generic response, but I will elaborate on it, is because America, because we love our burgers over here, and our fries. Don't come between us.
Your freedom fries.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so bad. But I think perhaps it's because you already had the inn. Not like, the inn was right next door. But it was close enough by as an establishment where if you did want that sort of fare and that sort of cuisine, you could go there. Al's Pancake World existed for whatever that means. I mean, in terms of, I don't think that was, competition in terms of serving up anything that was actually ever considered healthy. But just thinking outwardly, those were some establishments that were around and in existence, but there were also probably other dining options that the people of Stars Hollow had. You can always venture out to surrounding towns or neighborhoods, or go into Hartford if you so chose. But maybe it was just because you also have to know your demographic. So let's say, we're thinking that you exist in Stars Hollow, Connecticut, and in the year 2000, Luke is going to open up, a hibachi grill on the corner of the main road of town. Like, are you going to get the same traffic and the same volume in terms of people coming into your restaurant and spending money? Maybe not. So you also have to think from a business standpoint, what are the people of this town going to eat? And when you're presented with your diner and your all-American food, that's how he was going to get by and allow him to be the most profitable and successful. So I think that is something that we need to think about as well, and something that he maybe thought about as well. That's how you're going to make money, serving that type of food, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, I think that goes to the larger sort of food culture, especially in the US, with fast food and franchises like McDonald's, where it's fast, it's easy, it's tasty, it's comforting, and it is sort of a guaranteed way to bring in traffic and make the people happy. So capitalism, making us fat since forever. So that's a good one. It is entirely possible.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on again to, I think, possibly one of the most problematic characters on the show when it comes to food. Michelle. Michelle, okay, again, not an eating disorder clinician, just a layperson who happens to know a decent amount about eating disorders. His eating tendencies are disordered. He may not have a diagnosis necessarily. He may not even fit absolutely every criteria for a diagnosis. But there are definitely some tendencies on his part when it comes to his diet and his exercise regime. So, obviously he's a fictional character. We need to be careful with this. But I think understanding these things and knowing what the signs are can help you spot them in other people. And, obviously don't take that to shame them or to confront them with it. But the information can be useful to spot where you have issues with food or where people have issues with food, because it's such a regular component of our lives that if we're having problems with it, it can be very disruptive. And so, it's a good thing to sort of educate yourself on this stuff. Don't take it all from me. Like, literally go out and find people who know what they're talking about. Like, go listen to dietitians who specialize in this. But Michelle, again, not a diagnosis. Can't say that like louder for the people in the back. Michelle has orthorexic tendencies. So I have some notes here. It was Bratman and Knight in 2000 first suggested the following criteria for a new condition they labeled orthorexia nervosa. Spending over 3 hours a day thinking about or planning and preparing clean food. A feeling of superiority to those who do not follow the same principles. Presence of a strict and rigidly followed diet with compensatory deprivation in the case of any violation. The centrality of clean eating in life, which results in displacing personal interests, relationships, hobbies, values, and even personal health. Attaching more importance to the nutritional value of food than to enjoying it. Achieving a feeling of self-worth by dietary compliance. And psychosocial isolation. So at the time, this was a very new idea, and the research on this particular eating disorder is newer. So, I'm not fully up on all of the research and whether it's been well validated or not. But it's just one of those things that has gained some prominence in the last few years. This recognition that focusing on how clean your food is just a new way to be obsessed over food and body image that has a patina of I just want to be healthy. And it's not about weight loss. It's about feeling good. When in reality, it's just diet culture in a different package. We went from diet culture to wellness culture, but sometimes wellness culture can be just as harmful to our relationship with food and our bodies. So based on that list of things I just read to you about the criteria for orthorexia, does anything jump out at you when it comes to Michelle? Like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Is there anything that you want to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say first and foremost, it would be nice to have this question better answered if we saw how Michelle lived his life in his own home and how he started his day and ended his day when he was not, working for Lorelai. But I do, so that would answer a lot of those questions in terms of meal prep. But I do see a lot of these things potentially coming into play for him, especially with the self-worth and how you equate your self-worth to your diet. I feel like Michelle was very much a person who, first off, even from like a dress and a fashion standpoint, always very much cared about how he looked and how he was presenting himself. And granted, he needed to have that professional business look because that's what his job entailed, working, as the front desk and at an establishment. But I think regardless of what job he was working, that was just who Michelle was. He was very cognizant of dressing nice and being presentable and caring about how he looked. And I feel like that and that sense of self-worth can and does tie into diet and the foods that we're consuming. So it absolutely tracks for me, and it makes sense to me that he would be the type of person that is going home at the end of every day and having a healthy salad or, maybe some stir fry that's like low fat, low salt, and just preparing those healthy sort of meals for him. Starting off his days maybe with like a supplement or, an energy boost sort of drink that's low on calories, low on sugar. I could absolutely see him making those choices for himself. And again, having that tie into then him going about his day, just being like, I feel good because I made good choices today in terms of what I was putting into my body. So I absolutely see that tracking for him in terms of the definition of the condition that you laid out. As much as it pains me to say, you also indicated that there was that feeling of superiority when you're accomplishing that and doing better with that than somebody else is necessarily. And I can see that in Michelle as well, where, I could just see him going into the kitchen and Suki and Lorelai are chowing down on, cannolis. And him just being like, you're eating that. Like, why don't you just try and have some like, fruit salad instead? Or why don't you just try and, put together some like healthy greens for you? Like, and then just being like, well, Michelle, do you want a cannoli? And he'd be like, oh, no, I would never, I can see that superiority existing in him, whether he's verbalizing it or not. And even when he's not, I can see his mindset just being like, I do better than they do, and I am better than them because I'm making better and healthier choices, and that makes me feel better about myself. So even if it's an unspoken, innate superiority, I can see that still existing for him. Out of what you just said, I feel like those would be the two most prevalent things that I see that would lead me to conclude that, yeah, he probably does have that going on. But what do you think?
I tend to agree. I like what you said about, his concern for his appearance. There is that moment when in season 4, they're starting up with the dragonfly and he's like, no food sampling. And she tries to get him to eat the pizzelles. Mm-hmm. And he's like, as long as low-rise jeans are in fashion for men, I must stay trim or die. And then when he figures out that she is trying to get him to taste something, he's like, you're trying to fatten me out of a love life. I thought you were celibate, not by choice. Mm-hmm. I love that one. But yeah, I agree with the superiority thing. And the other thing that kind of grabbed me was that other than the fact that he's sort of like his personality is very grumpy, he likes Celine Dion and he is obsessed with fitness and healthy eating. His personality is not that built out. Like, he's very much, I don't even know, like, he's in the main credits, but I'm like, is he even a secondary character, or is he more of like a tertiary character because he has so little external stuff going on in his life that we know about, as opposed to someone like Suki, who, like, her wedding is a big deal, and the birth of her children and all of that is a very big deal. Whereas Michelle is just sort of in the background, being that, like, irreverent, angry friend. And even when we start to see something outside of that, like when his mom comes to town, it's his eating habits that come to the forefront, because Lorelai lets it slip to Giselle that Michelle doesn't eat carbs or pasta. And then Michelle flips his lid at her, because now it opens this floodgate with his mom about, like, well, what else aren't you telling me? What do you mean you don't eat pasta? And even she's like, we ate the pasta with all the terrible things on it. It was perfect. Like, calling food terrible, even though it was delicious. Just that sort of, like, the guilt associated with eating anything that's not perfectly healthy is a big deal. So there's that. But I see so much in his eating habits that we know about. Like, I don't even need to see what he does at home. I can only assume that, like you said, he's making, like, veggie stir fries with no, like, sodium-free seasonings and whatever. We know he doesn't eat dairy or meat. We know he is likely to weigh his foods. He counts the number of blueberries and he counts calories. He eats a very calorie restrictive diet. He says he only eats 1,500 calories a day, which is nowhere near probably enough for a man of his age and size. That, like, might be enough for what, an 11-year-old? Like, I'm not even sure. Again, not a dietitian, but 1,500 calories is barely anything. Most people's, like, basal metabolic rate is like 12 to 1,300 calories. And that's the number of calories you basically need to exist for your brain to function, for your heart to pump blood through your body, for your lungs to function, for your organs to function. That's like the basic number of calories you need just to exist without any movement. This is just if you were, like, lying on your bed doing nothing, that's how many calories you need to be alive. So 1,500 is next to nothing. And so the fact that he has any, like, muscle definition, not possible on 1,500 calories. Just not. You're not going to build muscle like that with that few calories. But and then another thing that grabs me about it is he mentions cheat meals. He mentions like reward, like food being a reward for good behavior. He mentions buying unhealthy food and changing his mind and throwing it out immediately. Like that story he tells when Papa dies about, like, retrieving the burger from the trash that he got from Luke's. And then he wants to go, like, eat one of those burgers in Papa's memory. That is really messed up behavior. Like, when you don't even eat the food you buy because you're like, I changed my mind, I can't eat anything that caloric. That's not a good way to look at food. And what gets me is that they always make a joke out of it. Like, when he says he's cutting his calories by 30% because that's what they did for the rats. And they're just joking about, like on Fame. And going back to the other thing you said about coming into the kitchen and watching Lorelai and Suki eating, there was that time that Michelle asked Suki to make him an egg white omelet. And she refuses and makes him an omelet with a pancetta and like a sherry olive oil or something, like, fancier. And so, she's like, you're asking me to compromise my artistic and culinary values. And, like, Lorelai just walks into the kitchen and hears this, and she's like, Michelle wanted an egg white omelet. Yes, crazy man. And he's like, how am I a crazy man for that? And then I've never heard anybody mention this before, and I just picked it up myself. I don't think I ever clocked it somehow. Maybe that's why nobody's ever mentioned it. But during this scene, he says something so damn offensive. He stands there. Suki has her back to him. She's like cooking, and he's talking to Lorelai, and she's still right there, and he's like, but I can't eat that and look like her. And he like nods his head towards Suki. And he's like, that'll kill you. Someday this will catch up to you. You'll become the balloon lady, and with the luck of God, I will be there to enjoy it. Pardon my French, which is fitting because it's Michelle.
No. Just say it.
That is fucked up. It is so mean to be like, I can't eat that and look like her. I'm retroactively offended for a fictional character. Got anything on that one? Because I'm about to like blow up. So you're
gonna have to give me wow. I mean, you're even gonna have to give me a second. Like, I'm reeling.
Yeah, and again, this is why I wanted to talk about this, because I'm like, just because the show wasn't perpetuating anorexic characters and having major plots about like EDs and all that kind of stuff, it still perpetuated just a very different version of messed up eating tendencies. And there was still all of this like overt but also subtle comedic fat phobia and demonization of anything that's not like thin whiteness. And so I guess I'll try to like ask you a different question so that you can just stop fuming. Because it, you know, I don't want to wallow in this forever because it's gross. But again, they make his disordered eating and his body issues a source of comedy and ridicule, which can be a trigger for people in the real world who deal with disordered eating. And so my main question is Amy writing it like this or approving stories like this because she thinks it's funny and a good source of comedy? Is it meant to be like lampooning people like Michelle, people who are so like worried about their weight that when they find out they had 2% milk in their coffee instead of skim, they're like running on the spot in the kitchen while like on the phone to customer service? Like, is she making fun of people who are so concerned with their diet like that? Or like, is it a critique of the crazy diet and body standards that were popular at the time? What do you think she was going for there?
I mean, again, short of asking her, who the F knows at this point? I'm sorry. Like, I'm sitting here livid over everything that you just said, because what a dangerous stereotype and perpetuation of thought. And I don't care that these are fictional characters. You can't do something like that. You can't say something like that. What that would have done to Suki in a fictional world, but what that would have done to, like, if you said something like that to someone in the real world, they're going to go home with that and they're going to live with that, not just that day, not just the next day. They're going to live with that forever, because something like that is not going to be forgotten. It's not going to be dismissed that you said something like that. And even in Suki and Michelle's case, it's like you're coworkers, but there also was like a very acquaintanceship, friendship there. And it's like, you're even saying that to someone that is potentially just a friend. Like, I can't even wrap my head around it right now. It just has me so upset that that line was put into place like that and that he said something like that. But going back to your question, again, short of talking to Amy, I don't know what her thought process was. I think it is the you know, whole idea of like those fad diets and the South Beach diet, or going on these cleanses where it's essentially like, we're just telling you to starve yourself and just ingest like, you know, a couple ounces of lemon juice every single day, or cayenne pepper, or whatever it is, and put this together and then consume it. And it's equating to like, you know, having your body ingest 100 calories a day, and then you're just dropping 20 pounds because of course, like, you're just not eating anything and your body is starving itself. If you want to commentate on how dangerous all of that can be, go do it all day, every day, because it is dangerous and it's toxic, and you're going to cause people to dive deep into the other end of this dangerous spectrum of, you're not even losing weight healthily in a healthy way at this point. You're just, your body is starving itself. So yes, you're dropping weight because of that. So yeah, that needs to be commented on because it's dangerous and unacceptable. But if you're doing and writing in the way that she is and allowing these jokes to bypass the writer's table and get a final stamp of approval, and even if the network is allowing this content to be aired because they think it's funny and it's humorous, it's not. And this is where we need to do a really good investigation into what we're putting out there from a writing standpoint. That's a discussion for another time. We'll get to that too. But I don't know what Amy could have been thinking. And if she thinks it's funny, it's not. It's dangerous rhetoric. And I think that perhaps she and the other writers should have done better. And I will call them out on it in terms of letting something like this slide and be inserted into the writing and letting this be seen by an audience when you have so many people out there in this day and age who are combating over a wide variety of eating disorders and who could be so triggered by something like this, when at the end of the day, this is a comfort show for so many. I'm appalled right now.
Yeah, and I shudder to think, again, these are fictional characters, but Melissa McCarthy is a real human being who had to be subject to one of her coworkers having to say the line, "I don't want to look like her," insinuating that she is somehow unhealthy or unacceptable. And it's sad. It's very sad. We're going to talk about objectification in the future, but this is just kind of another facet to it where, like, again, we're just policing women's bodies for no good reason. Like, they could have made any other kind of joke about his diet and it still wouldn't have been in the greatest of taste, because, again, like, they should be concerned that he seems to have an unhealthy obsession with his weight and his diet. They should be concerned for his health and his safety, as opposed to just being like, Michelle's just crazy. He's just so quirky. No, this is potentially an illness, and it's dominating his life, and you should be concerned for him. So I don't like that they made it to be so funny and so ridiculous, or like they tried to make it to be so funny, because I don't really think it was in the end. It's interesting because he's one of the few men I can think of who are shown to have disordered eating on television. I can't remember a ton of other people. I would say that maybe you would see more who had some sort of body dysmorphia or a desire to be bigger, actually, to be more muscular or to look more ideally masculine. But Michelle was all about, I must stay trim or die. And so it was sort of putting something that's typically aimed at women on television onto a man. So that was kind of an interesting flip to the script. But once again, they went too far and they made him a jerk about it. And it put their own employees in the line of fire for fat shaming.
Yeah.
Just not cool. So really didn't like that. There could have been so many other funny or interesting things to do with Michelle. And I just think it was a big misstep. Again, it was a product of its time in a way, but I don't understand why it's so difficult to grasp the concept that, like, making fun of people's bodies just isn't helpful or funny most of the time. I don't know why we ever thought that was a good idea, because it's just really mean and I don't like it. But I have at least one more person I want to talk about before we start to wrap up, and that is Mrs. Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Because she has a very different obsession with health foods. And it comes more out of religiosity than it does out of any external cultural standards that might impact us. So do you have any thoughts about how rigid Mrs. Kim's diet is and how that impacts Lane?
Yes. I'll just, it's a generalization that can go to so many things, but I will say first and foremost of her body, her choice. So if Mrs. Kim for herself decides that's the diet that she wants to have and she wants to be vegetarian or be vegan and only eat certain foods, well within her right to do so. I mean, again, I would hope that for her and for any other person, that you are choosing what your diet is going to look like and what you are consuming in a way that is going to, again, allow you to have the caloric intake that you need, allow your body to have the supplements and the fats and the lipids and the proteins that it's going to need to subsist and allow you to be healthy. And as long as you're doing that, eat what you want. And that's Mrs. Kim's choice to make for herself. But for her to turn around and put those same restrictions on Lane doesn't fly with me. I think it's good for any parent or anyone who is, a guardian of a child. Like, yeah, you want to see that young person eat and be healthy. And so if you can recommend foods to them and put lunches and dinners and meals in front of them that is going to give them all of the nutritional benefits that they need, um, and be a meal that they enjoy, good. But when you're restricting them in a way that is just not allowing them to partake in desserts or salty snacks, which again is not something that should we need to have every single day, but when you just completely cut a person off from that, like Mrs. Lane was cutting off Kim, Mrs. Lane and Kim.
Mrs. Lane. Nice. I love how we just end up talking so long that the words just start sounding like nothing.
Bear with us, folks. You know what we meant.
The 90-minute mark is always where we become word salad. So,
yep.
Welcome to our podcast. We are professionals here.
Word salad, pun intended.
Yeah,
all the puns this week. Yeah. Hope you enjoyed that one. But yes, when Mrs. Kim is just restricting Lane in that way, where you're not allowing her to even once or twice a week just have any one of those cheat snacks or cheat meals or indulge in any of those things, you're just actively constricting and restricting her in a way where it's like you need to let your kid make some of those choices for themselves too, not in a way where you're going to let your kid go to McDonald's every single day and get Big Macs right and left. But it's like, if your kid is just like, oh, Mom or Dad, can I have a candy bar tonight, after I finish dinner? Like, okay. Sugar is an important part of a diet anyway, so.
But it's chocolate-covered death.
Okay, Mrs. Kim. I thought I was
with a
talking
creamy
to Kate,
nougat filling.
I thought I was talking to Kate, but sure.
I was channeling Emily Kuroda for a second there.
Yeah. That restriction doesn't do your child any favors too, because when they knee-jerk react to that level of restriction, they can and they might just go so far the other way that it actually becomes problematic. I mean, and it doesn't even have to stem from food. It can just be with anything. I mean, that's why Lorelai rebelled so fiercely, because she had such restrictive parents across the board. But in this case, with us talking about food, that's why, we see instances of Lane in the street, hanging out with Lorelai and Rory and just being like, please God, do you have a Snickers? Do you have anything? Just help me, because she was so starved, again, pun intended, for those sorts of foods and those sorts of treats that she was never going to be allowed within the Kim household. So it's about, moderation and not overindulging in things that are so unhealthy for you. But as long as you can balance your dietary needs in a healthy way, like, yeah, have a snack once or twice a week, have a candy bar, like, but what Mrs. Kim was doing was so detrimental to Lane, and it was causing her to have those like really strong and fierce reactions of just wanting those outs whenever she can get it. And in Lane's case, she didn't overindulge, but she very easily could have as a result of what her mother was doing. And that's something that we also need to be worried about, is that overindulgence, because that can be very problematic too when we're being restricted, and that's how we compensate for it.
Yes, all interesting observations there. I think that Mrs. Kim was she was up there with Luke and Michelle as one of the characters on the show who attached a lot of moral valence to food. So, foods were categorized as good or bad, and anything bad was just completely off the menu. And just the extreme fear mongering over something that's like fine in moderation, as long as you're not going overboard and eating nothing but Mars bars, which sounds like my dream. Like, it's fine. It's fine. And she had to go to the Gilmores for her contraband, and it may have given her a messed up relationship with food in a different way from being so restricted against her will. It's almost like the almond mom phenomenon that people are talking about right now, where like, kids' diets were controlled by parents who were obsessed with weight loss and like their kids not getting fat, which is super gross, but we don't have enough time to totally go over that. So go check YouTube for other videos on it, because there's some good ones out there. And then, I also think of what she did to Kian with the, like, when Kian comes into the diner and is like, it's flaxseed muffin month. Like, all she's eating is flaxseed muffins, and it's not enough for her. And she's like, I can barely lift my toothbrush. And so there's just this idea that these sort of like quote unquote clean foods are somehow, automatically nutritionally superior or complete. And that's not always the case. And so you can deprive yourself of necessary nutrients when you limit yourself like that. So you have to be very careful when you have a vegan or vegetarian diet to make sure you're getting all of what you need, like your iron and your protein. And it sounds like Kian wasn't getting that if she was feeling that sort of like weak by what Mrs. Kim was feeding her. And not only that, but Mrs. Kim isn't necessarily immune from the fat shaming either. Like, I can think of the episode, I think it's the one where they have the Korean wedding in, I think it's Lorelai Out of Water. Min Jae looked good, lost weight, not so fat.
Yep.
Yeah. Gross. Not here for it. Like, there's so much fat phobia on the show. Like, it's in a way, the show was fairly progressive, and it did have an interesting diversity in body types that a lot of other shows at the time didn't have. But clearly it was still directing fat phobic comments at characters, typically not the recurring cast like Suki or Patty, obviously, other than the Michelle example I quoted. But if you weren't part of the inner circle, you were fair game for ridicule. And that's just not very nice. And, this is coming from especially two women who make fun of eating vegetables and people who exercise, but then will fat shame people. Mm-hmm. Like, it's, again, with the double standards and the, like, just the messed up ideas about what that means. So, yeah, there's so much that I could say about fat phobia, but we've already been going for over an hour and a half, and so I'm like, well, I should maybe rein myself in. But, something that I thought was interesting, we kind of touched on food and class in our last episode with Larissa, and I wanted to go just like one step further when it comes to sort of the fat shaming, and mention some instances of or some interesting things about it, and then maybe some instances from Emily, because we didn't really talk about her at all yet. But it's funny because the ideal body shape, especially for women, has gone through a lot of different iterations, and it's very like a trendy thing, which is again problematic in its own way. Like, your body shape should not be a trend.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do not try to copy what the Kardashians are doing, please, for the love of God. But it's funny because, you know, back in the day, being like a little bit fuller figured was actually a sign of wealth and an abundance. It was a good thing because it showed that you had the money to be able to have the good food. And when you were skinny, that was associated with poverty because you didn't have enough. And then as social conditions changed over time and we went from working in the field to working in an office or a factory, our body shape started to change and what was desirable started to change. Our ideas of masculinity and femininity started to change. Our ideas of what good health was started to change. We had the science coming in and discovering how detrimental obesity could be to our health. And so we started to get all these ideas around self-discipline and the ideal form and physical activity outside of work as part of your leisure time. And another interesting thing that sort of came out of this was an increasing disdain for conspicuous consumption, which makes me think of Emily. Like, it started to become sort of like the thing of the nouveau riche to show off just exactly how rich you were and how abundant your food was. And it was more of like an old money thing. Like, we don't have to prove anything. We're so comfortable that like we can avoid the abundance and show that we have discipline or that we have enough wealth to partake in these other expensive hobbies, you know, like sports, because we have the money for the equipment or whatever. So that, again, like I said, makes me think of the Gilmores because everything at their house is sort of like a production. And I'm thinking of that episode. I think it's P.S. I Love, when Rory runs away to their house and she comes down for breakfast and you see this like whole spread of breakfast foods. And Rory comes down and she sees this entire table of food and she's like, I think I'll just have some eggs. And so like there's not even eggs on the table. She has the person make her some eggs. And that's fine. Eggs are a great breakfast. They're a complete protein. Fantastic. But what is all that food doing there? How much of that is getting eaten? How much of it is getting wasted? It's very conspicuous consumption. And like every event that she puts on is like, well, we have a sushi bar and a carving station, but only beef and no like turkey. And this giant cake for Rory's birthday. Everything was about, we have the money to put on a nice spread, whether or not all this food gets eaten, which is an interesting topic unto itself. But then also, I can't remember which episode it's in. I think it might be the birthday parties episode when it's either like the episode 1 or sorry, season 1, episode 6, or Rory's birthday party in season 6 when they're setting up for a party at her house. And she says like the chairs are too far apart. And she's like, if you're like,
That's the season 1.
Yeah, this is season 1. Yeah, she's like, if people need this much space to get through the chairs, they should be on a treadmill, not at a party. So there's that.
Okay, Emily. Just great. Good stuff.
Yeah. And then there's the moment where she in the flashback episode, when Lorelai is having the realization that she's pregnant and she doesn't fit into her gown for cotillion. And she's like, put on your sweats and run around the block. You're going to fit into the next dress no matter what. Excuse me? Just
I mean, obviously that was never going to happen because of the pregnancy at that point, but like Emily not knowing that and making that comment and just being like without her saying it, she was just being like, you're getting fat, so go for a run.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up as it pertains to class, at least at this point, but this is like a big one for me. If you'll remember presenting Lorelai Gilmore, when Lorelai is standing there talking to a bunch of other like mothers, and like the people around her are being like, these things will be the death of me. Oh, I know. And we've had no time to prep. Janet just got out of Rainbow Hills 2 days ago. Rehab? Fat farm. Like, just the fact that diet culture is so pervasive among the upper class that they will literally send their kids to residential facilities where they're basically abused and taught eating disorders. And this is just like what's glorified and what's normal in the name of having the right body. And like, God forbid you should have a kid that has like a little extra weight on their frame. Okay, I feel like I need to get off my soapbox now, but like I had a lot of thoughts on like the fat phobia in class issue. So
nope, you're good.
Shut me up.
Nope, I think it was a soapbox that is, you needed to be on it because people need to hear it. You know, if we bypass these things and we don't comment on them and we don't call out, you know, what we're seeing is wrong or what we perceive is wrong, especially when it's shaming and judging other people in a way that can be so severely detrimental, like, no, we need to talk about it. So don't get off your soapbox, stay on it because people need to hear it. We can't be treating other people this way. We can't be talking to other people this way. We can't be passing this judgment or doing all of these just really toxic things. It hurts that person, whoever they are, so much. And it can lead to just really disastrous things for them. So no, you're right in everything that you said. And I'm glad that you said it. It needed to be said. And I wish more people would speak out on it because we're still, as a society, actively doing this to one another. And it's not okay.
Yeah, the long-term consequences are like so much worse than we could imagine. We think we're doing the right thing by being like, well, you should just like lose a little bit of weight, or you should just put on a little bit of weight, or like maybe you shouldn't eat that. Like, I'm a big fan of the Maintenance Phase podcast and basically anything Michael Hobbs does. But there's this one episode where his podcast partner, Aubrey, tells a story about how one time she was at a restaurant and someone like literally tried to take food off her plate because she's in a larger body. Is that disgusting or is that disgusting?
I'm just going to sit here and be mad again.
Yeah, yep. Exactly. Like the audacity that you think you have the right to do that to someone because it's just the paternalism and the like, oh, the holier than thou, I know better than you because I'm smaller or whatever. Like you have no idea what's going on in somebody else's life or like what their medical journey with their weight is. So just like stay the F out of it. That's all I have to say. I feel like I could say so much more about this. I feel like I got more notes, but if I don't stop now, I'll just never stop. And you need me to stop. So
no, we're good.
Send us home.
I will do just that. If you've been listening to this discussion, again, please take everything we're saying, knowing that we are not healthcare professionals. We are not dietitians. We are not in that field whatsoever. We are just commenting on it based on how we see things, how we view food and diet culture, and how we see that represented in the show. So please, I will say, always just take the advice of actual healthcare professionals, people who are working within that field. And while we hope that this conversation has been hopefully beneficial to you in one way or another and not detrimental, please just always actively seek the advice of healthcare professionals. And not us, not other fads or diet trends or other people that you may see on the internet. Always do the education for yourself and seek out professional and healthcare opinions from trained professionals and people who are working within that field.
Yeah, don't just listen to anyone. Like, check out their credentials. Make sure they went to an actual school and didn't just do like a week-long certificate on the internet because like there's no regulation for nutritionists or like nutritional healers or anything like that. Those are not accredited diplomas or degrees. They are not regulated. The only thing that's like really regulated is a registered dietitian. So make sure that they went to an actual school and they didn't get a diploma from a diploma mill and they're not chiropractors giving you nutrition information. Make sure they're staying in their lane and that they're actual accredited professionals who are part of a licensed body, because those are the people who have like ethical things to maintain. Like they're held to higher standards. They have more education. They have more training, and they're regulated by a licensing body, as opposed to people out here on the internet who can just say whatever they want and get away with it because they're not on the hook for that. Like it's wild how much health and medical misinformation is out there. So make sure you're getting it from trusted sources and not just listening to anyone.
And these people can be so persuasive when you hear them because they think they know what's right and they don't. So all we can say is just do your homework, listen to actual trained professionals. Don't just listen to anybody and their mother. And just always be mindful of your own health journey and your own path. Don't ever let anyone tear you down or criticize you unnecessarily. And what we hope that you've gained from even listening to us is just, to be kind to yourself and be kind to others, because everyone has their own journey with food and with health. So don't pass judgments, don't shame, just view everyone for who they are. And if you can do that, I think you're going to just be largely successful at life. In terms
and remember,
go ahead.
And remember that, like, most of the time, like, you're not the problem, society is the problem. So focus on your own health and how you feel and what is actually going on in your body, and try to tune out, like, the crap and the messaging from the world.
Yep. But that is going to conclude us for this evening. Again, we hope that this conversation has been enlightening to you and helpful to you in some way. If it has, drop us a comment and let us know. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts on this topic. You can also find us on social media. I mean, if you want to talk to us, all of the descriptions to that can be found below. We've included all our links to that. Now that we're done with this topic, I will ask, what is coming up next for us on the Gilmore Way?
Next week, we're returning to the boyfriends. This time, we're talking about bad boyfriends. So, not bad boys.
So, like, so all
boyfriends.
of them?
So all of them.
So all of them.
We'll be talking about the ones that we haven't really talked about as much in depth. Kind of the guys who aren't right for the Gilmore Girls. And it's not that they're, like, bad people, but just that they were done dirty, or we didn't get enough of them, or they're just not compatible with our gals. So I think that'll be a fun conversation. A little more lighthearted.
Yep, this was a bit heavy this week, so
yeah.
But come back and join us for that. In the meantime, go back and watch some of our old content. We had a lot of really good episodes the past few weeks. Last week, we just sat down with Larissa from Eating Gilmore. That was a really fun and even lighter conversation about food than this one was, we promise. So please go back and watch that. The week before that, we did a really spectacular special episode with Jenny from the Fan Fest organization. Go back and watch that and consider buying a ticket to that event if you want more information. Just watch that episode and we'll link the Fan Fest and the tickets for that event in the description below. And please just remember to always do all of those YouTube things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's one click and it really does always help us out. And we're so grateful and appreciative of the support. That being said, just be a stand-up human being. Go on your own path, your own journey, diet, and physicality and otherwise. And as I'm going to steal it again from one of our mutual friends, as I've done the past few weeks, be excellent to one another. And that's all you got. So
yeah. And on that note, we'll see you next Friday for a healthy, well-balanced dinner.
Bye.
Bye.